examples of these here in a minute. But what we want to do, what we argue, is that you want to come up with and identify a model of performance for your organization. So it's a good time of year for this. Most of you probably finished your strategic plan or participated in the planning process in your organization. I challenge you to go back and ask, do we have a model of performance that takes the things we're trying to accomplish and puts them into a framework that not only articulates the variables, but helps communicate to the workforce what that looks like? So let me give you an example here. From the 1996 Porter article, What is Strategy, as I mentioned, here's an activity map for Southwest Airlines. What it essentially does is articulate the key areas of performance the organization needs to optimize. Ground crew turnaround, aircraft utilization. Again, all these things are subject to measurement and should be, but what we ask and we challenge you to do is how do we understand how they fit in relationship to one another so that we can ultimately communicate and then test with measurement and then identify to the strength of the relationships among them. We have another couple examples here shortly. So one example of a performance model is the activity map. As Bob would have talked about this morning, again, another example is the strategy map. Kaplan and Norton have made popular through the work in the balanced scorecard this idea of the strategy map. Who here uses a strategy map or something similar to it? Does anyone? Anyone a success map or some other type of model? We're seeing maybe 10% of organizations use those. Now, the idea here isn't to have you create these and proliferate them in your organization. That's not the intent. I want to be clear. The intent is to help ensure that you and your senior managers go through a process to understand what are the key performance variables, how do they fit in relationship to one another, and before we start collecting measurement data, which obviously you can collect reams and scads of, what are the key variables that we're trying to optimize. Now, for those of you who are type A personalities, you may want to go out and get the Deloitte value map. Has anyone seen this? Or you should have this on your wall. That's right, some of you have this on your wall. I'm sure you look at it first thing in the morning when you come in. What the Deloitte value map does, again, is it helps us understand how we drive shareholder value through driving revenue, managing margins, managing expectations and assets. So what we've done here is we've looked across the range of performance models. And again, Andy Neely's created one called the Success Map. Out of Harvard Business School is the service profit chain. There's a variety of these. You can use them at an organizational level. You can use them at a process level. You can use them within an individual function. But what we're advocating is part of your process, take stock of the key performance variables and how they fit in relationship to one another. And that's the first step. So I challenge you to go back and say, have we done this in our organization? The next is managing projects. Would anyone like to take a crack at what the project success rate is? And when I define success, what I'm talking about is projects that are completed on time, on budget, with the intended benefits, business benefits. What's the rough success rate, do you think? How much? 20%? I heard 10%. I've seen anywhere between 5% and about 30%. Depends on what survey you're looking at. PricewaterhouseCoopers does an interesting survey. In fact, they're doing it again right now every year. Managing projects in organizations is important. And the reason I'm mentioning this is it's not important just at the project manager level. It's important at your level. You and your colleagues on the executive team need to be involved in project management. Not aware of it. You don't need to manage the project plans every day, but you need to maintain a continuous focus on those high-level, what we call vital projects in your enterprise, because they consume considerable time, money, and management attention, which is perhaps least scarce. Here's the comment that my boss has the attention span of a 4-year-old. I think that characterizes a lot of bosses in corporate America. But the reality is you want to come with a short list of critical projects that you can drive through to completion. So the second step in our process, after you model performance, is to identify those key or vital projects that you need to be successful, winnow it down to a short list, and manage them very closely at the executive team level. There's a huge opportunity out there. My last company, Palladium, 20% savings can be achieved by better project management. McKinsey & Company will tell you project performance, business benefits are enhanced by 30% or more. I would submit to you just the mere focus that you get by winnowing your project set down is of tremendous value for the senior team, who is, again, challenged with scarce time and certainly scarce dollars. So how do we do that? You want to make sure that your project managers manage daily. That's common sense. You want to make sure that weekly and monthly you are involved, that you have owners and sponsors for these projects, that the executive team sit down and talk about these. I'd be willing to bet, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but I would also be willing to bet that it doesn't happen in a lot of your organizations. And you need to ensure that those key drivers of progress projects are being managed and you're driving influence constantly. Who here uses business cases? Sets up good quality business cases with benefits, high-level project plans. Some of you do. That's great. There's plenty of templates out there. I won't make a case for this is our unique template or not. That's not important. What is important is that you understand for your quote-unquote strategic projects or initiatives what they look like. Who owns them, what the description is, which key objectives on your performance model they map to, what the key metrics are, what the project plan is, and you manage them. Again, I would say ideally weekly, at a minimum monthly. Capturing these, profiling these will enable you to take your organization's set of projects, winnow them down to a more manageable number that you can implement quickly. Again, speed is our friend when it comes to managing in turbulent environments. Something that we stole from the pages of Kaplan and Norton, from their book, The Execution Premium, aligning projects back to key performance objectives. So this simple alignment matrix, what it shows here is on your vertical axis are all the objectives that you're trying to achieve on your performance model. In this case, it's an organization strategy map. What you have on the horizontal axis at the top is a high-level listing of all your projects, presumably in a business case format. And what we want to do is see where there's alignment. You and your executive team want to talk through what are our highest priority projects? What are the most critical things we need to do? Just getting agreement among those things. And again, as the CFO and the head of finance, you can drive that level of discipline, and frankly, you are needed to do that within your organization. But the bottom line is odds, 5, 10, 20%, these are not great odds when it comes to getting projects implemented. So we need to do something to tip the scales in our favor. Your time, your energy, your investment is what will make a huge difference when it comes to aligning projects back to your critical performance objectives. So our second step, make sure you capture, align, and then rigorously manage at the top team level your projects. Measure progress. You can measure anything. That's great about organizational life and performance management. The bad news is what? You can measure anything. And there are organizations that seem to try to measure not just anything, but everything. Not all measures, again, are created equal. We're trying to distill and identify those handful of performance measures that we believe, and then we can test with data, drive performance. So what we want to do is make sure we measure progress on our projects, as we just talked about a minute ago, and we want to make sure we measure progress on our performance model. So ultimately, we can go back again and test those relationships, and you'll see an example here shortly. So a measure, basic definition. You say, why would he present a basic definition of a performance measure? Because it's done so badly in organizations. We run across a lot of organizations that have a lot of data and information, but it's not clear what they're trying to measure. A measure simply quantifies the efficiency and effectiveness of an action. And here are the elements of it. What's the name of this measure? What are we trying to identify? What is the purpose? Organizations don't often clarify the purpose of their performance measures. Which objective on our performance model is it linked back to, or which particular milestone on our critical project listing? What's the target we're trying to achieve? Is there a clear formula that people understand? Again, this can be loaded into a software system, which it should be, but if it's not, your life is going to be a lot harder. What's the frequency with which we measure so we can get the information we need? Where do we get that information? And ultimately, really, here's the question, who does what with that information? What type of action is taken? Okay, again, back to the definition, it's a quantification of the efficiency and effectiveness of an action. We want to make sure as managers we're driving the right action. Oftentimes, you're the keeper of performance measurement data. So you want to make sure in your organization you're pushing for the right level of action. And you know that there are a logical set of relationships back to our performance model that underlie data. One of the benefits of the balanced scorecard early on was just sorting data into different categories, not just financial data, but customer data, process data, people, innovation data. But we know now, obviously, there's a relationship among data. So that what we want to try to do using our performance modeling process is look at what those relationships are. So we have a set of antecedents. If we're trying to improve customer satisfaction or we have a customer management strategy, we want to understand what are the particular metrics that we need to collect to drive customer satisfaction. But they are in relationship. As I mentioned earlier, the service profit chain is a model that articulates that so that we can get the consequences or the effects that we want in terms of willingness to recommend us, repurchasing decisions, and obviously additional penetration using this example, which drives financial performance. But one of the things that the performance modeling process does for us is it articulates it doesn't just identify the variables, it articulates the variables and enables us to select the right performance data that we can ultimately test. Does anyone know who Gary Loveman is? CEO of Harrah's Gaming, former Harvard Business School professor that went on to, I'll say, run one of the most successful organizations today, certainly not just in gaming in Las Vegas, but organizations, I'll say, worldwide. Gary Loveman spoke at an event that I was at recently, and his comment was, we want to bring real data to understand what the variables are. We want to understand what, we want to use actual prediction. We want to see what causes improved profitability. Once we know those things, then we can orient our management system to manage those things. But underlying that is a set of measures that is in relationship to the variables that drive that performance. So this example is from some of Andy Neely's research with British Airways. If anyone flown British Airways? Flown overseas, certainly those are long flights. Obviously, they can be painful if you have turbulence. They can be challenging if you don't get good quality service. Well, what drives turnover or sales at British Airways or most airlines? Well, in the actual data that we pulled out, we found that willingness to recommend drives turnover. Back to the example we saw a minute ago. Customer satisfaction is a large determinant there. What drives customer satisfaction, you might ask? Cabin crew service. British Airways is known for their cabin crew service. But what drives effective service? Some obvious things. So when a survey is done, and they're rigorous about collecting data at BA, how was your check-in process? Did you get a friendly face? Were you able to check in quickly, efficiently? Be able to move from flight check-in to the corridor where you can do all of your shopping, meet all of your needs before you take off in Heathrow. The meal quality is obviously a major factor that impacts cabin crew service. But what was interesting when we started collecting data was departure time, and that's negatively correlated to cabin crew service. Why would that be? Why do you think you'd see a negative? So if, in effect, the later the flight left, the better the cabin crew was rated on service, and then the higher the likelihood of recommending. Why would that be the case? I hear a lot of grumbling. Anybody, why would that be the case?
Halo effect.
What's the halo effect?
People see one part of something going well, and they tend to extrapolate that to other parts.
Absolutely. So the flight takes off late. The cabin crew recognizes that. They probably work, in fact, they did work a little bit harder to satisfy the needs of the passengers. At the end of the flight, they had a better experience. So kind of, as you might not expect, there's a relationship in terms of willingness to recommend around departure time, in fact, the delay in departure time. So what we want to use once we articulate a performance model like this is real data to test it. And it helps us, again, as senior leaders, make better decisions.